You're listening to the Outdoors Channel.
Who? What? Yeah!
Woo! I think it's a splendid idea.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoors Channel Book Club. There's been a lot of talk recently this year on various forums and blogs about the Pyrenees as a walking destination. So, book club host Andy Howell has been checking out various maps and books, etc., with a recent Pyrenees visitor, Shirley Worral. They've got plenty to chat about and lots of good information to pass on, which we will hear in a moment. First, let's settle back and relax for a while with New Zealander Edwin Derrickott and a chilled-out track called Write Your Name, which is available, of course, on the Podsafe Music Network.
In your house and key. Weave your colored thread in me to catch the light while I still breathe. Won't you say what's on your shine upon my floor, be the warmth of my heart and the breeze of my field, be both my comfort and beauty. Write your name on my heart tonight and light a place in where you can say what's on your mind. Suggest my steps and watch me breathe. Watch the horizon fall on me. Put again a fluent pen into my hand and finish your song in me. Your name on my heart and light a place in my heart. Your name on my heart and light a place in my heart. Write your name on my heart and light a place in my heart. Wanna let you in somehow, wanna let the master keys come out, wanna sign across this broken line, wanna let your signature be mine.
Welcome to the second edition of the Book Club. I'm Andy Howell. While the nights are drawing in and another holiday season comes to an end, perhaps time to start thinking about next year's trek or walking holiday. Throughout the winter, the Outdoors Channel will be looking at some great backpacking destinations and reviewing the guides, books and maps that can help you explore them. First off, we're tackling the Pyrenees, that fabulous mountain region that runs from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean and forms the border between Spain and France. I've got a small mountain of guidebooks and maps in front of me, and to help me work my way through them, I'm pleased to welcome Shirley Worral, who has herself recently returned from the Pyrenees. Shirley, welcome.
Hello.
Now, this was your second trip to the Pyrenees, but the first time you'd taken to the high route. Did you have a good time?
I had an absolutely fantastic time. I went for a fortnight. I spent about, of those 14 days, I spent about 11 or 12 days actually walking on the high route. And it was one of the most exciting walking experiences of my life. It was absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. The weather was lovely. And I had a wonderful time.
Highlights?
Well, I suppose that, there were a number of highlights of various sorts. First of all, there was just the absolutely staggering beauty of the place. I'd obviously seen lots of pictures before I'd been, and I did go last year for a week, although I didn't do a great deal of walking. But it wasn't really until I actually got up into the high mountains themselves that I basically appreciated just how absolutely gorgeous they are. I mean, first of all, there's the sort of fantastic scenes, beautiful mountains, some of them snow-topped, low, lush valleys, lovely Pyrenean cows shaking little bells and smiling at me, and the sheep as well, and the occasional free-range pig. And then in addition to that, all sorts of beautiful flowers and insects, lots of reptiles, and basically an enormous variety of lovely things, all of which were interesting.
The wild camping is fabulous, and I think you sampled some of the high refuges as well.
I did. I stayed at quite a number of the high refuges. I started my walk in Bourse, having stayed there last year. I stayed again at the Gite because I had a great time last year. And then from there I went to Refuge Darlais, or Darlès, depending upon how it's pronounced. I dropped down from there into Candanchu, which is in Spain, and down in, I suppose you would call it a large village or perhaps a small town, and stayed at what is effectively a gîte there. But after that, I got back up into the hills, and I went to Refuge d'Ayus, followed that with Refuge de Pombi, and then the refuge at Aramuli. On the way to Aramuli, I passed the Spanish refuge, Refugio de Repomanso. After that, it was Refuge de Vallon. I then went down to Courtrai so that I could wash my absolutely disgusting kit and buy some new food. But the following day, I took the first opportunity to get back into the hills because basically the mountains were so beautiful that I didn't want to spend a day in Courtrai anymore. I camped that night at the refuge des Oulettes de Gorbe, which is next to a glacier, the first glacier that I've ever seen. I walked from there over to Gavarnie, passing Refuge de Bacelance on the way. I would have liked to stay at Bacelance because I think it's actually the highest staffed refuge in the Pyrenees, as far as I understand it. But it just didn't really work out with the timings. But I stopped there for something to eat. And basically those are the refuges that I stayed at. They were fantastic. I'd recommend that everybody who goes over there should definitely, I didn't stay in them, I should say. I ate in them and I camped outside, but I recommend that people try them out.
Most of the refuges have camping grounds around them, and anyone is more than welcome to join everyone in the refuge for a meal. And it's a great way of meeting people. In fact, you meet people from all over the world.
You do. I found eating in the refuges to be one of the most pleasurable parts of the whole experience. The food itself was actually really pretty impressive, bearing in mind the conditions in which it was being prepared. I also enjoyed the fact that the French way of eating is very different from ours, so that each night in a refuge I had 4 courses, all of them simple, but all of them delicious. But also, I really enjoyed just meeting people that I'd not met before, in fact, none of whom spoke English. I didn't meet a single British person in any of the refuges, and so I was forced to fall back upon the French that I've been attempting to learn for the last 12 months, and that in itself was enormous fun. It's just great fun meeting people from all over the place that you haven't met before and struggling to communicate with them in a foreign language. I found, incidentally, if anybody's thinking of going over there, that dinner in a refuge costs about €15, and if you want breakfast as well, that's simpler, and it's about €6. It's pretty good value.
Now, a lot of people who are thinking about exploring these mountains get a bit worried that somehow they might not be up for it. But in my experience, anybody who's walked extensively in the lakes or Snowdonia shouldn't have any problems with the Pyrenees at all, should they?
Well, I agree. I was unsure, but when I got out there, I found that there really wasn't anything to worry about. Most of my walking over here has been in the Lake District in Scotland. I've done a bit of walking in Snowdonia as well, so I've walked in fairly rocky places over here. When I got over there, I found that in common with walking over here, if you're doing any sort of lengthy backpack, you tend to encounter, a fairly lengthy and steep ascent every day and then some kind of descent. The ground underfoot was different only really, I thought, in that it was drier and perhaps the rocks were a little bit sharper than they are over here. But I didn't have a problem with them at all, so I'm entirely confident, having now done it myself, that anybody who's reasonably experienced at walking over here in the places that people tend to walk, is just not going to encounter a problem in walking over there. Even on the high route, I was walking on the high route most of the time, as opposed to either the GR10 or the GR11, and even on the high route, I found that I didn't have a difficulty.
The walking, the scenery, the drama of the mountains are very different from anything we have in the UK.
Well, it is. It's the scale of the thing is what's most immediately noticeable about it. It's just on such an enormous scale, basically. The Lake District is lovely, and it will probably always be the place that I do most of my walking. But really, I felt that the Lake District looked like a window box in comparison with the Pyrenees. I felt that when I went to Scotland, that the lakes looked like a window box. But even Scotland looked relatively small when I went over to the Pyrenees. So the scale is immediately noticeable, and just basically the beauty of the place, which of course is enhanced by the fact that it's so sunny a lot of the time. I understand that it can sometimes be oppressively hot in the Pyrenees during August, which is when I went. It was slightly less hot this year, and so I perhaps benefited from that. But I know from having spoken to other people, including you, who've done it in the past, that it's fairly easy to get around the heat by simply starting earlier in the day, so that you don't have to walk at the hottest part of the day. So yes, it was quite different really from the walking that I'd done before. I particularly enjoyed being able to wake up in the tent to sunshine and to get out and eat my breakfast in sunshine with virtually no biting insects, surrounded by beautiful scenery and friendly cattle and friendly sheep. It was brilliant.
Well, you've certainly sold the place, so let's have a look at the books and the maps that are going to help people explore. First off, I want to look at a book here which is a kind of reference book, the kind of thing that you'd use to plan your trip, and it's by Kev Reynolds. It's called The Pyrenees, the High Pyrenees from the Cirque de l'Escon to the Carlite Massif, and it's one of a new series from Cicerone called World Mountain Range Guides. Very, very comprehensive book. If you haven't been to the area before, it'll certainly give you a good idea in terms of what to expect, how places connect up, how you get in and out of mountain areas. Very comprehensive.
It is. It's a fantastic book. I bought it last year on your recommendation, and I'm looking at it now. It's, as you say, it's not the kind of thing that you'd take with you because it's simply too large and heavy. But it's comprehensive. It's beautifully illustrated with not only photographs but also pictures of interesting things that you might see along the way in various stages. I found, because I wasn't familiar with the area, that perhaps it didn't mean as much to me as it might have meant to a person who was more experienced, because I was unable to see the places that were being described in their proper context. But I think that when I go back next year, I'm going to have a much better idea of what it is that I'm actually reading about in this book, and I'm going to find it very helpful in deciding what I want to do when I get out there.
Yes, you'll be able to cuddle up with this one all the way through the winter, planning next year's trip. Another good reference book for those of you that are thinking about your first trip to the Pyrenees is the Lonely Planet Walking in France guide. This has a good section on the Pyrenees, features 4 or 5 towns that are good as base camps for day walks, and it also highlights a number of excursions, 3 or 4 day trips, which will give you a feel of the higher mountains and give you the chance to do some wild camping and experience the high refuges. Like all the Lonely Planet guides, it's very good at telling you how to get in and out of the area, describing the towns, the range of accommodation there is there, and that kind of thing. So that's certainly well recommended if you're planning your first trip. Lonely Planet Walking in France guide. Now let's turn to the trail guides that you take with you. And we'll start first by looking at the long-distance footpaths, the GR10, which follows the length of the mountains on the French side, and the GR11, which follows the length of the mountains on the Spanish side. Both of these books are published by Cicerone and written by Paul Lucia, and I think, Shirley, that you use the GR10 guide quite extensively.
I did. I found it was very helpful. It was one of 3 books that I used a lot, really, when I was planning my trip. It's in common with a lot of guidebooks. It divides the GR10 into the basic daily sections, and in relation to each of those sections, it gives information about how much height is gained, how much height is lost. I notice actually it does in fact tell you how far the section is, gives you an approximation of how long it's likely to take you, and it tells you which map you're going to need in order to be able to complete it, which is actually very useful. It then goes on to give a fairly detailed description of what you're going to pass along the way. It includes a profile giving you an idea of a sort of pictorial idea of how much ascent and descent are involved. And there are little photographs of pretty or interesting things that you might see in the course of the walk. So it was very useful. Yeah, I found that it was very helpful.
So recommended there, the Paul Lucia guides, the GR10 and the GR11. Now, moving up a bit higher to the high route, or the Haute route, as it's known. This is the route that follows the ridge of the mountains wherever it can, passing over from France to Spain and then back to France again. Certainly where you get the most stunning, dramatic Pyrenean scenery. And we're looking at a guidebook here, only a couple of years old, also a Cicerone guide, the Pyrenean Haute route, written by Tom Jewston. I think, Shirley, you use this quite a bit. I certainly think this is probably the most comprehensive trail guide that I've ever read.
It is. It's, I mean, as I think you said, it's probably the one that I use more than any other one, because I knew before I went that if everything went according to the plan, I wanted to spend most of my time on the high route as opposed to down on either the GR10 or the GR11. And so I looked through this one pretty carefully. In common with the Paul Lucia guide that we've just spoken about, in relation to each day, it sort of splits the high route up into manageable sections, which are suggestions, of course, as opposed to some sort of prescriptive kind of instruction about the way that you need to do it. But if you choose to follow those sections, then it gives you information about where it goes, and it gives you a sort of grading about how difficult the day is likely to be. It tells you how high you're going to have to climb, and how much descent there's going to be involved. It also gives a very useful little summary at the side of each daily walk of basically what it's going to be like, rather than having to read through the whole daily description to get an idea of what it's like. You can read this little thing at the side. So I found that it was very helpful. It's also got maps. It's got a little map of where you're likely to be going each day, and I found that was very helpful in locating those places on the real maps that I actually took with me. And the other thing that I found particularly helpful about this book is that it identifies parts of the route where people who are not good at heights, for instance, or perhaps not as experienced as they might like to be in walking in high places, might encounter difficulties. And on each of those occasions, and in respect of each of those places, it suggests alternatives. And I found that was very useful. A couple of times I had thought that I might use the alternative routes because I'm not actually very good at heights. But in the end, I found that I did go the higher way and I didn't have a problem. But it's nice to know that he first of all identifies those places, and secondly, that he points out, how you might choose to go a different way if for some reason you don't want to take the conventional route. So I found it extremely useful. And in addition to that, and in common with the other ones, it has some information at the front of the book about basically getting to France, getting from the place that you land to the places that you might want to travel to in order to start the walk. And finally, and I found this particularly helpful, at the back there's a table that extends over several pages that identifies each of the little villages that a person's going to walk through, and tells you what amenities you're going to find there. For instance, cash point, hotel, supermarket, a gîte, places to buy food and things like that. And that makes it very much easier to plan, basically, because most of us going for a fortnight aren't going to be wanting to carry a fortnight's worth of food with us. So that was very helpful.
Even for beginners, I think the high route is something to aim for. I find in many ways it's easier walking than the GR10. With the GR10, you're starting in a village every morning, you're climbing high, then you're climbing right back down again to another village. Whereas with the high route, you're climbing up high and then you're staying high on the ridge of the mountains. In many ways, I find that a much more pleasant experience.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably my experience as well, and certainly I've heard other people saying the same thing. I mean, clearly, if you are walking along the high route, then you are going to be encountering, well, I was only there for a fortnight, so I can't talk about the whole thing, but in the part that I was doing, I mean, I did encounter a climb up and a climb down every day, but I think very probably not to the same extent as I might have encountered those things if I'd been doing the GR10 or 11.
He's quite a character, Jewston. He says in the introduction to the book that he's been walking in the Pyrenees for 20 years and has never really felt the need to walk anywhere else. Now, you can kind of see how you get to that point, but his enthusiasm for the mountains kind of knocks you out, doesn't it?
It does. It's inspiring, basically. His enthusiasm is definitely inspiring.
So that's The Haute Route by Tom Jewston, published by Cicerone. Now moving on to our next guide, which is Trekking in the Pyrenees by Douglas Streatfeild James, a trailblazer guide. And this I know is the favourite of a lot of people. And I think you like this book very much, Shirley.
I did find it very useful. Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, because as you've said, he doesn't stick to any particular route. He divides the Pyrenees into several parts, and in relation to each one of those parts, he provides instructions on how to walk the GR10 part of that route, and then instructions on how the GR11 would be divided there. But then in addition to that, he also gives information about excursions that you might like to take in that general area, and he draws attention, I think, also to where the high-level route goes. On a daily basis, there's a sort of pictorial profile or a sort of graphical profile of the route that you're going to take, so that's very helpful. And then instead of having kind of extracts from something like an OS map, he's actually got a sort of Wainwrighty sort of drawing of where the route goes on a daily basis, and I found that those were very clear and easy to follow, and it wasn't difficult to find them on the map. And so I did find that it was very helpful. There's also information, and the other guides have this too, but I found it particularly helpful in this book, information on a daily basis about the places that the walk goes to. So he'll tell you what services and amenities you might expect to find in a village, and he'll suggest the places that you might be able to stay. You know, if you've got an unlimited budget, then he'll tell you which is the best hotel. But if you're working to a smaller budget, then he'll point out where the gîtes might be or the campsite, if that's what you're after. So all that information is there. And then in addition to those things, something I particularly like, and this is in common with other trailblazer guides that I've got, it also contains photographs of flowers and wildlife that people are likely to encounter in the area that they're going to. And it's really quite a comprehensive list of, or rather sort of series of pictures of the little flowers. And I found that I really enjoyed looking through those before I went away. And when I got there, it gave me some kind of idea of what it was that I was looking at. So on all sorts of levels, I particularly like this book.
Definitely a hit there. That's Trekking in the Pyrenees, Douglas Streatfeild James, and that's published by Trailblazer. Now moving on to the guide that started it all. This is Kev Reynolds' Walks and Climbs in the Pyrenees, published by Cicerone, and I think is now in its 5th or 6th edition. A very different guidebook to the others. It doesn't have day itineraries in quite the same way, rather it describes routes from place to place, and this is a guide that's particularly valued by more independent-minded travellers. You pick your map, work out your route, and then use Walks and Climbs in the Pyrenees to sketch out point-to-point instructions. Anybody that's ever used Scottish Hill Tracks, the Scottish book that works in a similar way, will know how this feels. Probably the guide I am most likely to have in my rucksack, but perhaps not the guide for the first timer.
No, I did actually buy a copy of that book last year. I think it was the first of the Pyrenean books that I actually bought based upon your recommendation. But unfortunately, and due entirely to my own fault, I managed to lose it in the post last year by sending it home to myself from France, and so therefore I wasn't able to use it in this year's preparations, but it's on my list of things to get before I go back next year.
Yes, it's certainly a book that works when you've had a bit of experience of the mountains already. That's Walks and Climbs of the Pyrenees by Kev Reynolds. Now, moving on to look at maps, and before we start to look at those in depth, I think we should point out that the Pyrenees trails have a very, very effective system of signing. Both the GR10 and the GR11 share the same system of red and white splashes of paint, and much of the high route is also indicated. It's a very effective system of signing, which effectively means it's very difficult to get lost.
Well, it does mean that, and being very navigationally challenged, I found that particularly reassuring. There were points at which I found that the little red and white marks would seem to disappear for a short time, but most of the time it was pretty easy to follow. If people haven't been before, it's quite different from anything that I've ever seen over here. These little marks are marked on trees, rocks, and sometimes they're on the ground. And you know, on a very sort of regular basis. I mean, sometimes, you know, every sort of, I don't know, 10 or 15 meters or so, you'll see one of these things. And they have a cunning way of indicating whether you're supposed to go straight on or right or left. And so, therefore, even without a map, it might actually be possible to find your way on the GR10 or the GR11, or even on parts of the high route. Although I'd certainly take a map myself, but it's a lot less easy to get lost over there than it is over here.
Yes, some would say it's impossible to get lost on the GR10, but I've certainly managed it, but that's a story for another day. So, looking now at maps, which are pretty indispensable, I think, I agree. There are two types of maps for the Pyrenees. There's a 1 to 50,000 set, called the Carte de Randonnée, which are walkers' maps, and there's a 1 to 25,000 set. Rather unusually, I think, for those of us who've grown up with OS maps, the 1 to 50,000 set is probably the most useful because that has all of the walking routes, the long distance trails marked on them, where the 1 to 25,000 map, although it has the GR10, the GR11, often doesn't feature the high route or other walking routes at all. So probably the 1 to 50,000 routes are a bit more useful.
Yeah, well, I actually have quite a selection of maps of the Pyrenees now because I wasn't sure where I was going to go and quite what I might want to use. And so I've got a number of the 1 to 50s and I've also got a number of the 1 to 25s. But in the end, and based upon, well, looking at them and also based upon what you told me about them, I decided to just stick with the 1 to 50s because I certainly didn't want to carry 10 maps if it was possible for me to get by with 3. And I found that, in fact, that for almost the entirety of my walk, I just used one map, which is the Carte de Randonnée. It's the French. There's the Carte de Randonnée for France, and then there's the equivalent for Spain. This was the French one, and in the French series, it's number 3 for Bern. And I used that for almost the entire journey. I just needed to use the sort of Spanish equivalent, which is number 24 in the Spanish series, for the sort of further part of my route, which involved walking around Gavarnie. And up Toulouse. And so, I found that they were excellent. A couple of times when I wasn't quite sure where I was, I asked people, and French people did tend to produce the 1 to 25s, but I'm still not convinced that there was really any more useful information on those than there was on the 1 to 50s. And so when I go back next year, I'm just going to stick with the 1 to 50s.
Yes, the 1 to 50,000 are certainly more than adequate for most of the time. I think some people get a bit concerned because you can't really use GPS systems with the 1 to 50,000, whereas you can with the 1 to 25,000. But they're not really necessary GR systems in the Pyrenees, I don't think. Well, no, I always carry a GPS over here.
I don't use it very much. I have it basically to get a grid reference if I'm sort of completely lost. And I had intended to take one to France, but simply because I wasn't organised enough to work out in advance how to use it over there with the maps. I ended up leaving it at home, and I didn't feel any need of it at any stage. So those people who like to use the GPS, for instance, to make a record of where they've been, will want to take one. But I really don't think anybody actually needs to take a GPS in order to help them with route finding.
So there you have it. Stick to the 1 to 50,000 maps, and you'll have all the information, the detail that you'll need, and coupled with the really fantastic signing system of the Pyrenean routes, you should be fine. Shirley, thanks very much. You've been wonderful company for the last 40 minutes or so. I take it you're going to be going back to the Pyrenees.
I can't wait to get back. I'm already lying in bed at night searching through the high-level route book and the other ones to decide where I'm going next year. I mean, it really was absolutely fantastic, and I'd urge anybody who enjoys walking over here and particularly enjoys sunshine, I would urge them to get over there as quickly as they possibly can. There's absolutely nothing to worry about, and I can just guarantee that you're going to have a fantastic time.
Shirley, thanks again.
You're welcome. No problem. I enjoyed it.
Well, there you have it. The Pyrenees are a fantastic mountain range, and I hope we've inspired you to check out the guides, maybe even to start seriously thinking about that first excursion. Of the books we looked at this evening, a clutch of them were from Cicerone, the Pyrenees World Mountain Series Guide by Kev Reynolds at £18, also by Kev Reynolds Walks and Climbs in the Pyrenees at £15, the Pyrenean Haute Route by Tom Jewston at £15, the GR10 Trail by Paul Lucia at £12.95, also by Paul Lucia Through the Spanish Pyrenees on the GR11 at £12.95. We looked at the Trailblazer Guide Trekking the Pyrenees by Douglas Streetfield James, and that sells for £11.99, and the Lonely Planet Walking in France Guide, which sells for £14.99. We also looked at the maps for the Pyrenees, the ISGN 1 to 25,000 series, and the 1 to 50,000 Carte de Randonnée and their Spanish equivalents. Both sets of maps can be found at Stanford's, www.stanfords.co.uk, and at the Map Shop, www.themapshop.co.uk. Well, that just about wraps up this podcast. Thanks again to Shirley Worral, and of course, as always, thanks to Bob Cartwright, without whom the Outdoors channel wouldn't be possible. You've been listening to the Book Club. My name is Andy Howell, and until next time, take care and happy hiking.
My thanks go to Book Club host Andy Howell and his guest Shirley Worral for compiling the show. I hope you find there's lots of useful and inspiring information in there. Well, that about wraps it up for me. Do stay tuned, as there's lots more coming from the Outdoors channel over the next few months. And of course, any feedback is always welcome on our voicemail service. Anyway, take care out there, and bye for now.
Call now on this number.
020-8133-9434.
Call me anytime you want.
This podcast is produced and hosted by The Outdoors Channel. Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our podcasts by visiting theoutdoorschannel.co.uk.
Ciao, baby.